Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. And Kemi Badenoch, in a speech yesterday, accepted that Brexit has damaged the UK economy. In fact, she described it as one of the things that the Conservative government had to deal with, forgetting that they implemented it unnecessarily. However, her main criticism is, and has been for a while, that the Conservatives failed on Brexit not by going through with it in the maddest possible way, without consulting the public properly as well, but by going through with it without a plan. Now, it is certainly true that the Conservatives had no plan. There was never a roadmap for what Brexit was supposed to look like, and quite deliberately, because if you presented that roadmap to the public would have gone, oh yeah, let's not do that. And a plan will always produce a better outcome than no plan, of course, even if you plan to do something insane. And the Conservatives largely understood that Brexit was insane. But let us not fool ourselves that a plan would have magically made Brexit deliver on its promises. There were three broad areas of Brexit. Anything else was really just a facet of one of these areas. The first was dropping EU membership. That is all that the illegally conducted referendum covered. The second was leaving the single market. And the third was leaving the customs union. So how would a plan have approached each of these three areas of Brexit? Well, let's be clear about the consequences of each. Dropping EU membership means we lose our say on EU rules and future direction of the bloc. We would lose our place on the EU Council, our representation on the EU Commission, and have no representatives in the EU Parliament. It means we have no power in trade deals, tariff rates, geopolitical priorities, how to respond to external threats, what laws the EU should amend, repeal or create, and so on. However, with a plan, we could still potentially have a voice. A strategy might have recognised that we would still be a large economy with a relatively large security and defence force, and we could have arranged to take part in summits to at least make arguments on which others would vote and decide. But what would we gain by dropping EU membership? Well, nothing at all. A plan could have made the change less severe, but it would not have stopped the damage existing. The second aspect was leaving the single market. This is like the big one. The consequence of this were losing our access to friction-free trade in goods and free movement around one of the three largest markets in the world and the only one on our doorstep that we could ever have free access to. So what could a plan have done to ease the consequences of this? Well, if we'd properly prepared for the new trade friction, hiring the 50,000 new customs officials that Michael Gove talked about before we left the single market and built up our facilities in order to carry out all the necessary checks, that would have put us in a better position. Because we had no plan, we are unable to carry out enough checks to stop rampant smuggling and dangerous, even deadly foodstuffs and livestock coming into the country. For years, we didn't even try. And we still don't have, by the way, those 50,000 customs and standards checkings officials, nor do we have the facilities to carry out the checks. And we're not even attempting to build them up. So the Tories put people's lives at risk rather than plan to carry out the checks necessary to protect our market and the public. Another problem this created was an uneven playing field. Because the EU did plan, they carried out full checks from day one. They were ready. We still don't carry out full checks today, and we've got absolutely no intention of. The practical upshot of this is that although there is trade friction both ways, it's easier for EU businesses to export to Britain than for British businesses to export to the EU. This denies us leverage in future negotiations. Trade negotiations take the form of offering to ease trade friction into your market in return for your negotiation partner doing the same for you into their market. But in talks like that, we're already at a disadvantage by being the smaller market. So all things being equal, we have to offer more access to our market to be worth the same level of trade. But we also have another disadvantage in that access to our market is already lower, just because we never built up the people and facilities needed to maintain third country checks. And this plan would have been difficult. Hiring and training 50,000 new customs officers would have been challenging, perhaps even impossible. It would certainly have taken years to do it. Imagine you've got to hire them first of all, you've got to then train them, they need a few years to get used to things. You're years away, and it would cost a fortune. The Financial Times pointed out several years ago that doing this would mean the UK would have more bureaucrats than the entire EU combined. So much for reducing bureaucracy. As for the facilities to carry out the checks without bringing traffic to a standstill at Dover, that would have been very difficult. You cannot just expand at Dover because building on the sea is considered difficult, which means more inland facilities and the risks of holes in your security. For example, lorry comes in through Dover, you say, oh, you need to go to that place 15 miles inland to get checked. Well, what's to stop illicit cargo being dropped off somewhere between Dover and the inland checking facility where the lorry is made to go? Would we put CCTV all along every road in Kent? How much would that cost to do? And hire people to monitor it. And even if we did manage to do all of this, if we had a plan to do it at huge expense, it would still make trade weaker and cost the country money. Taxes would still have to go up as we lose out on tax receipts from trade or cut services. And the government's having to pay out more to cover the services necessary to carry out the checks that weren't necessary before. In fact, working on a plan to leave the single market would probably have concluded that leaving the single market just wasn't feasible. And this is probably why the Conservatives never worked on such a plan. One area where a plan might have helped in real terms would be accepting the deal on business travel. The EU offered us a deal which would have allowed performers to work more easily in the EU. We rejected it. A plan may have incorporated this deal as at least limiting the damage, but it wouldn't come up with any benefits to leaving, much less net benefits. As for the customs union, I discussed that in more detail the other day. Some similar issues to leaving the single market in terms of extra bureaucracy and checks needed, which no plan would circumnavigate. A plan might have better prepared for carrying out the checks and perhaps devised a better system for registering the paperwork, but the paperwork would still need to be done and cargo would still need to be checked to avoid smuggling, and all of that costs money. And just as with the single market, a planning team may have concluded that when so much trade passes through one part of an island, it's really not possible to build up the facilities needed to cope without creating artificial land expansions into the sea. Put simply, had there been proper planning for Brexit, which would need to be published and debated in Parliament and therefore made public, it might just have scared the shit out of the public, causing them to back away from the entire concept. Indeed, public opinion had already moved against leaving, with a people's vote by 2019 believed to have resulted in a vote to remain had the public been given the choice. But what plan does Kemi Badenoch think would have turned Brexit from something she acknowledges damaged the UK economy to something that wouldn't? And given that she has been the Conservative Party leader for over a year now, if the problem was a lack of a plan, why hasn't she come up with one of her own? After all, she claims she's going to be the next Prime Minister. So she's insisting she's ready to govern, right? So where's the plan? Kemi Badenoch said the problem with Brexit was a lack of plan. Where's her planning? Do you think journalists should be asking her to explain the plan? Let me know in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel for more content. Click the bell notification icon so you know when new videos are coming out. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.